Welcome to Procurement in the Real World. This was originally presented as Procurement 401 in 2017. It has been updated to reflect recent USDA guidance. I'm Kathryn Hodges from the Department of Education, Office of Nutrition Programs and Services. The recorded webinar, Procurement Basics, covered defining procurement. It touched on procurement regulations, talked about various procurement methods, defined small purchase thresholds. It stressed good procurement principles and practices, and stressed the importance of detailed specifications, and provided a list of prohibitive procurement practices. The recorded webinar, Procuring Locally, built on that information and covered ways to procure, contract requirements, documentation to maintain, writing clear specifications, defining local, incorporating geographic preference, evaluating bids, managing the contract, and forward contracts. The recorded webinar procurement process covered planning and forecasting, writing specifications, defining local and applying geographic preference, advertising the solicitation, awarding the contract, managing the contract elements, and contract disputes. This workshop, Procurement in the Real World, will cover reminders in defining procurement, regulations, procurement process, procurement principles, and some new topics, Buy American, and the Procurement Review. Any item or service purchased for any amount must follow some level of the procurement regulation. All meal programs must follow proper procurement procedures. Federal law requires all purchases made out of the nonprofit school food service account or any food service account accepting federal dollars follow federal procurement regulations. Why? Because we want to ensure that taxpayer dollars are used in the most efficient way possible. In the simplest terms, a well-run procurement process ensures fair and open competition. If vendors know that there will be competition, they're more likely to give a lower price or a better product, rather than risk not making the sale at all. This saves your program money. There are many steps in the procurement process, and often does not end once the item is received or the service is performed. Thus, it is a process and not an event. Federal regulations require that every purchase made out of the nonprofit food service account be made using a procurement process, no matter how small the purchase is. The regulations do set out a different process for micro, small, and large purchases. Purchases under the small purchase threshold can follow the informal procurement method, which is simpler, but it is still a procurement process that must be followed. Under the regulations, even the micro purchase threshold requires that a procurement process be conducted. We will talk more in a bit about the informal and formal procurement methods, but first, let's talk about what the regulations are. Procurement regulations flow from federal to state to local. You should follow the strictest regulations that apply to you. If local or state regulations conflict with federal regulations or are less restrictive than federal, follow the federal regulations. With a federal small purchase threshold of $250,000, any purchase over that amount would use the formal procurement method. Any purchase under that amount could use either the formal or informal procurement method. Note that if your local small purchase threshold is lower than the Fed 250,000, for example, 20,000, then you would follow the formal method for any purchases over 20,000. The federal micro purchase level is currently set at $10,000. If allowed by your local regulations, then any purchase that falls under $10,000 per transaction can just be purchased without obtaining quotes or bids or comparing prices. The two caveats are that similar purchases are spread around equitably to available vendors, and as is the case in all purchases, that they are reasonable, allowable, and necessary. So back to the question. If you only make small purchases, then potentially your purchases would fall in either the micro or small purchase categories. These are the good procurement principles. Fair and open competition. All vendors are bidding on the same items. The more vendors that are competing for your business, the lower the price will potentially be. Fairness and integrity. This area would include guidelines around the Procurement Code of Conduct policies and procedures. A proper procurement code of conduct policy would help employees avoid real or perceived conflicts of interest in the procurement process. A procurement code of conduct is required and must be followed even if all your purchases fall under your small purchase threshold. Your school district, or SAU likely already has a purchasing code of conduct in place for purchasing books and school buses and computers. Check with your business administrator to see. If so, you can just begin following that code for your school food service purchases. If you just like a company better, then that's not a good enough reason to go with them. But if your specs require a certain level of customer service, deliver on Tuesdays before 10, have live telephone support 9 to 5, then you can eliminate companies that don't meet those requirements. Just make sure that these requirements and specs are really worth paying more for. In addition, your specs cannot be so limiting or restrictive that only the company you like can meet them. Responsive and responsible contractors. You may look back on past purchases to evaluate vendors. If a past vendor did not hold up their end of the bargain, then you can consider them a non-responsible contractor. You are not required to contact them or award further contracts to them, but make sure you have documentation to support all your decisions. Did the company agree to supply you with high-quality fresh produce last year and then delivered significant amounts of rotten produce? Then that company is not responsible because they have a poor record of past performance. And transparency. If at any point you feel uncomfortable about how something is being done, then step back and evaluate the situation. If it made headlines, would your mother be proud of you or disappointed in you? If at any point you question how something is to be done, contact your state agency for guidance. No matter which procurement method is used, no matter if the purchase is over or under the small purchase threshold, the purchase must be competitive and fully documented. All purchases must be reasonable, allowable, and necessary. If the purchase is under the threshold, you may still use the formal procurement method. The Buy American regulations have been around for a long time. However, it has recently become a reviewable item during the administrative procurement review. The whole point of USDA is to feed children and support U.S. agriculture. Section 104D of the William F. Golding Child Nutrition Reauthorization Act of 1998, Public Law 105 to 336, added a provision, Section 12N, to the NSLA 42 U.S.C. 1760N, requiring school food authorities to purchase, to the maximum extent practicable, domestic commodity or product. Section 12N of the NSLA defines domestic commodity or product as an agricultural commodity that is produced in the United States and a food product that is processed in the United States using substantial agricultural commodities that are produced in the United States. Substantial means that at least 51% of the final processed product consists of agricultural commodities that were grown domestically. Products from Guam, American Samoa, Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and the Northern Mariana Islands are allowed under this provision as territories of the United States. Allowed exceptions will be discussed on a later slide. Before utilizing an exception, alternatives to purchasing non-domestic food products should be considered. For example, the School Food Authority should ask, are there other domestic sources for this product? Your contractor or distributor should be able to help you answer this question. Is there a domestic product that could be easily substituted if the non-domestic product is less expensive? Again, your distributor should be able to tell you if domestic pears are more accessible and at lower cost than non-domestic peaches. Am I soliciting bids for this product at the best time of year? If I contracted earlier or later in the season, would prices and/or availability change? The two allowed exceptions are product is not produced or manufactured in the U.S. in sufficient and reasonable available quantities of a satisfactory quality, or competitive bids reveal the cost of a U.S. product are significantly higher than the non-domestic product. If either of these exceptions are used, there is no requirement that the food service request a waiver from the state agency in order to purchase a non-domestic product. However, the SFA must keep documentation justifying the exception. To stay compliant, first, add language to your specification that the product must comply with the Buy American regulations. Second, make sure that the same language appears in your solicitations and contracts. Make sure that you and the contractor address alternative methods. Make sure that any and all exceptions are documented. The documentation is transactional. You cannot receive a blanket statement that covers the entire year except for those products that are not produced in the U.S. at all, things like pineapple or mandarin oranges. Just because tomatoes are not available in February, and so they are coming from Mexico, doesn't mean that tomatoes from the U.S. are never available. They're just not available in February. Get your contractor to help you. Have them include the country of origin on delivery slips and on the invoices. Monitor the product as it comes in the door. If something is not a U.S. product, request exception documentation immediately, as specified in your contract. Sample language to be used in specifications, solicitations, and contracts include, as required by the Buy American provision, all products must be of domestic origin as required by 7 CFR Part 210.21d. The district participates in the National School Lunch Program and School Breakfast Program and is required to use the nonprofit food service fund to the maximum extent practical to buy domestic commodities or products for program meals. A domestic commodity or product is defined as one that is either produced in the U.S. or is processed in the U.S. substantially using agricultural commodities that are products in the U.S. as provided in 7 CFR Part 210.21d. Exceptions to the Buy American provision should be used as a last resort. However, an alternative or exception may be approved upon request. To be considered for the alternative or exception, the request must be submitted in writing to state the person's name, a minimum of, identify a number of days in advance of delivery. The request must include the alternative substitutes that are domestic and meet the required specifications, price of the domestic food alternative substitute, availability of the domestic alternative substitute in relation to the quantity ordered, reason for the exception, limited or lack of availability, or price, and include the price, price of the domestic food product, and price of the non-domestic product that meets the required specification of the domestic product. If the product in inventory doesn't specifically identify that the country of origin is the United States, then confirm that documentation is on file that supports the exception. Considered alternatives to the non-domestic product, and verified that the menu planner considered alternatives to the non-domestic product. After adding the appropriate language to your procurement documents, reviewing the labels on the products coming through your door is the next step in complying with the Buy American regulations. Not only will the labels tell you where the products are coming from, they will also identify if your distributor is complying with your contract. You want the labels to confirm the country of origin. When labels list only the distributor's warehouse location, you need to contact your distributor to get more information. For example, all Cisco products that we have seen have listed Houston, Texas as the distribution location. While Texas is in the US, the products are only stored there for a brief period of time. They came from somewhere else. The distributor must provide you with that somewhere else. New Hampshire State Agency has combined the administrative review with the procurement review. These are the items that will be reviewed for procurement. The procurement worksheet, a vendor list or general ledger, supporting documentation for selected transactions, the code of conduct, and the written procurement procedures. The Procurement Code of Conduct and the written procurement procedures are requested to be attached to the annual application to participate. They will be evaluated during the procurement review itself. The Procurement Code of Conduct is the document that supports the integrity of the procurement process. It states who is responsible for purchasing, how purchasing will be conducted, what are the acceptable practices, and what happens if the code is broken. The written procurement procedures is the document that guides how the process will be handled. The state agency will review the written procedures and verify if the practice follows process. The state agency will provide a procurement tool for the food service to complete. This tool is an Excel worksheet. Only one tab needs to be completed by the food service. The rest of the pages will be up to the state agency to complete. The state agency will compare what was entered to the vendor payment list provided by the School Food Authority and select transactions to be analyzed further. The School Food Authority will provide specifications, advertisements, evaluation comparisons, contracts, purchase orders, receiving reports, invoices for the selected transactions. On the SFA Procurement Table tab of the worksheet, the SFA will identify who is responsible for the different aspects of the procurement process. The small purchase threshold will be identified. The SFA will indicate if they use the services of a group buying organization or group purchasing organization during the previous school year. Then, all the purchases listed on the vendor list or general ledger for the previous school year will be broken down into procurement levels: micro purchase, small purchase, formal purchases, food service management company contracts, and processing contracts. Contracts established by a GBO or GPO will be reviewed at the group organization level. Unless otherwise directed by your local office, a second contract at your specific location is not required by the state agency. Based on samples provided by a USDA training, the state agency has developed sample documents to help create a procurement code of conduct and written procurement procedures. Again, as with the food service management company RFP and contract sample documents, your legal counsel and school board should review what you put together. 2 CFR 200 Super Circular is not too hard to read or get through. You just need to take the time to read through it. For those FSAs using or thinking of using a food service management company, USDA has updated the Food Service Management Company Guidance to School Food Authorities 2016. This manual provides guidance on issuing the proposal, reviewing the evaluation criteria, awarding the contract, and managing or monitoring the contract. The Institute of Child Nutrition has several procurement online trainings. These online workshops can be used to meet your professional standards training requirements. And don't forget us. The Office of Nutrition Programs and Services is here whenever you need us. For further help, please don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you for your time.